So, the 70% rule. I think I'm finally starting to get comfortable with this whole talking to myself thing. Um, and I thought it would be really kind of apropos to not even get ready. Like, I'm still kind of waking up and I'm not prepared. I have no notes. But I think that's like a perfect time to talk about the 70% rule. Is a totally unpolished YouTube video. Like, so what the 70% rule is essentially is it's basically 70% out of 100% is good enough. It's good enough of a product for you to put out. It's good enough of a video for you to put out, a song for you to put out. It's good enough of a project for you to put out to get started, right? You know, to get traction, to start a routine, to begin something. Because rather than chasing perfection, 70% of nothing is better than 100% of nothing. Rather, 70% of something is better than 100% of nothing, right? Meaning, you want to chase this perfection, so you're trying to start a YouTube channel, or you're trying to start a new career, or you want to turn in that project, but it never gets done because it's never perfect, right? You can always nitpick at something. You can always say, oh, but this isn't good enough, the lighting isn't good enough, my sound isn't good enough, I don't have a camera. um, Even though cell phones have cameras, I'm not good looking enough, I don't sing well enough for that audition. Whatever it is, you can nitpick yourself out of even trying, and that's 100% of nothing. Whereas if you allow yourself the leeway of just at least getting 70% done, 70% of your own standards, keeping in mind we're harder on ourselves than anybody is ever going to be on us. If you allow yourself to put something out there that you don't think is quite perfect, at least you're starting, and that's heading towards positive change. It's heading in the right direction. That's assuming success. All the top athletes, all the most successful business people, all the most um, powerful, wealthy celebrities and everything, ev- millionaires, billionaires, they all seem to understand this. And this is what the average person doesn't understand is, well, self-worth and belief in yourself, and just trying. Just try. Just put it out there and assume that what you're doing, whatever it is, it could be anything, you're going to be successful. Um, like a perfect example, when I was younger, I trained in taekwondo, um, kickboxing, jujitsu, a few martial arts, and taekwondo being the one that I spent the most time on. And when we would compete, we were told to visualize, and we were told about how Olympic athletes, Olympic taekwondo players, would visualize their success, and they would assume they were successful. I was so young and naive that I didn't understand this. It didn't make any sense to me. I remember thinking, well, why am I going to visualize myself being successful? What, like, how is me imagining myself doing something going to affect the physical outcome. That's stupid. That's impossible. I'd rather worry. I would rather. It's hilarious to think of it now because it doesn't make any sense. But I would rather feel bad about it. I would rather worry and tell myself that I suck and that I'm not going to do well and just struggle and strain and force it rather than assume that it will go well and just live in the present and just produce. Now, it happened that I was really talented at it and I was a natural anyway, so it didn't really matter. I did okay in spite of myself. But I was my own worst critic, right? Like everybody else was really. Everyone else believed in me so wholeheartedly that they assumed success for me. Everyone else would always tell me after I competed or after I did something, after I went for a belt promotion or something, that they knew that I was going to succeed. Even though I was thinking about every worst case scenario imaginable. That's all I could ever think about is the negative. Don't do that, right? Like, it was a torturous state to be in. It was very unhappy, and worrying achieves nothing. So, uh, I mean, tying it back to the 70% rule, you're worried that what you're putting out there is not going to be good enough, so you don't put it out there at all. And then it just goes nowhere. Nothing happens, right? At best, you're at nothing, and you stay exactly where you are with no growth, and you don't slip backwards. But at worst, the worrying brings about into your life exactly what you're worried about: lack of success, lack of money, lack of friends, lack of new opportunities, whatever it is. The worry can be so extraordinarily detrimental to your life, but it can't help, no matter how comfortable it is to worry. And I know how comfortable it can be to worry. I remember, it seems like a distant memory now, but I remember what it was like being comfortable worrying about the future, about what was going to happen. But it's only in the present where we can thrive, where we can succeed. So there's also a lot of talk about the human mind, its natural state for our survival mechanisms is to worry about the future or torture ourselves with our past and our fears and obsess about the past, never quite living in the moment, never quite living in the present. And that's another thing that top athletes, I bring up athletes a lot because that was a big part of my childhood growing up, being an athlete, being um, like hardcore physical training and stuff like that. So I know what it looks like competing at a top level and seeing people who compete at a top level just believing in yourself and not worrying, and how important it is to be present. Don't think about your opponent's moves. I think fighting is a perfect allegory, or martial arts is a perfect allegory for this, because if you try to predict what your opponent does, in martial arts, it's a really good example. It's called telegraphing, right? So somebody will give a physical tell before they do something. Their weight will shift to a certain foot, or they'll drop a shoulder, or they'll do something, right? And if you study your opponent's moves, you'll know this. So like really high level athletes, or like high level like boxers will do this, right? They'll study their opponent's moves and they'll learn their tells. MMA fighters, they'll do this. They'll study their opponent's fights, all the previous fights, and they'll get a sense of how that opponent fights. So, trying to predict the future by the tells that the telegraphing that their opponent does, right? So, like before he does a left hook, he does this or he does that, right? Well, anyway, that's how you get baited. The funny thing is, you can take advantage of this by feinting. So, feinting is when you fake that you're going to do something to get your opponent to react, and then you can counter them. So, it's ironic trying to live in the future, trying to predict the future, and obsessing or worrying about what your opponent is going to do can keep you out of the present moment. And it can stop you from being able to react to what's happening in real time. So don't worry about all that. 70% is good enough. Maybe 80% if you're a perfectionist, right? But don't wait till perfect. There's no reason to. Put something out there. Just try. Just, or rather, don't try, do. Assume your success. Hopefully, somewhere in there was a coherent point. 70%. Um, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Get out there and succeed. Don't worry about if you fail. And if you fail, do it again. And again and again until you build up a muscle memory of what not to do. The worst that can happen is that you put it out there and it didn't work. But at least you put it out there. Because nothing is worse than just remaining stationary and doing nothing. 70%. Do it. Live in light. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, or don't. See you next time.